Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you. You look good. Welcome to Hokies. Thanks, bro. Welcome to Hokies Village. My name is Drew, and I get to serve as one of the pastors here at Hope, and it's so good to be here with you all tonight. If you were here with us last week, you know that we started a brand new series that is going to carry us through this season of Lent, which is the 40 days that it's the 40 days that lead up to the celebration of Easter Sunday. And over these 40 days, the church throughout history has taken this time to prepare ourselves for Easter and to turn our faces with Jesus toward Jerusalem and to get serious about asking ourselves the question, what does it mean to actually be Jesus' disciple? What does it mean to follow Jesus on this way that he's going? And we get serious about the things that keep us, that hinder us from actually following Jesus on this way. And so last week we kicked off this series that we're calling Come and Die, an invitation to the cruciform life by looking at the call that Jesus gives to his disciples in Matthew chapter 16, which is, if anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. So we looked at that and we talked about how we are called as disciples of Jesus to step into this vocation of cross-bearing that looks like this vocation of self-giving love for the sake of the world. And so as we continue in this series, we're going to continue to go deeper into what it means to deny ourselves and take up our cross. And we're going to be continuing in the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus starts to get a little more concrete about what it means to take up this cross. And so as we continue in our series today, I'd like to speak to you from the topic, cycle breakers. Cycle breakers. Let me pray for us and then we'll jump into our sermon together. Father God, we thank you so much that you are here with us in our midst. Lord, we just want to pause and we want to acknowledge the fact that you're present. We don't ever want to take that for granted. But we don't want to take for granted the fact that we get to call you our God and that you call us your people. What a privilege that is. And Lord, tonight I know that we come into this place from all sorts of different places. Lord, we come in carrying burdens and hurts and sorrow. Some of us come in here on the heights of joy, Lord, where we're experiencing joy. And some of us in here are just somewhere in the middle, Lord. But I pray that wherever we're at in this space tonight, Lord, I pray that you would meet us. I pray that you would move in and out of these pews and that you would minister to us and speak to our hearts, God. I pray that the things that might distract us from the things that you want to say, God, that we would be able to set that thing down for just a moment so that we might be able to be attentive to your spirit. And so, Lord, I ask that I wouldn't be a distraction to what you want to do tonight. And so, Lord, would you move me out of the way? Hide me behind your cross so that Jesus might be all in all. And so, Lord, to that end, I pray that you would allow the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart to be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer in whom we trust. It's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Amen. So how many of you in here have siblings? Quite a few hands. Quite a few hands. I don't know if it's like this with you and your siblings, but whenever I get together with my siblings, and one of them is right here, my brother Aaron, there are always certain stories that come up from our childhood. Anybody else have that dynamic when you're with your siblings? There are certain stories that are always told from growing up. And one of those stories that I always end up bringing up has to do with my brother Devin. And see Devin here up on the screen. There he is. That's us. We're probably, I don't know how old we are, like 8, 9, 10, something. So Devin is a year and a half older than I am. And we were always pretty tight growing up, sort of like, best friends and worst enemies all at the same time. And now I'm the little brother. I'm the youngest. And so as the little brother, one of the roles that little brothers have to play in the family is to annoy the heck out of their older siblings. That's just what we do. That's just what we do. And listen, I played my role to perfection. And so now I would annoy Devin all the time. And I wasn't annoying him just for the sake of being annoying. It was actually because I looked up to him. It was actually because I wanted to be like my big brother. I wanted to do the things that he did, and do the things that he said. And so I would mimic him all the time. And I would go around and I would follow him and I would copy him and stuff like that. And Devin used to hate it. He could not stand it. So I remember one time when we're getting ready to head out to my cousin's high school graduation party. And we're sitting up in our bedroom, and I was doing my little brother thing, annoying Devin. Aaron, you remember what I'm about to say. So I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, and I'm saying something, and Devin just gets to his breaking point. Because I'm just annoying him so much. And I remember, because I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, but I'm sitting with my knees up, like I'm kind of hugging my knees. And I say something, and Devin just walks by me. He does it kind of ever so slightly. He just walks by me, he takes my knee, and he just pushes it up into my face. And I start leaking blood. And we're getting ready to walk out the door. So there's blood all over my shirt. And my dad walks in the room. And he sees this, and Devin immediately takes off. He just starts, he's running. He runs downstairs. He runs outside, and my dad chases him. So before we're getting ready to get in the car, my dad is chasing Devin around the front yard. Just chasing him, and my dad, he's not catching Devin, but he's chasing. He's like, Devin, and he's... Eventually my dad gave up. He's like, all right, we gotta go. And so we get in the car, and my dad vows, he's like, Devin, when we get back, you're gonna get in trouble. When we get home, we're gonna handle this. But guess what never happened? Devin never got in trouble. Because we went to the graduation party, and everybody just kind of moved on, except me, of course. I remember what happened. But everybody just moved on. And so whenever I tell this story, I always bring this up, and I tell this to my dad too. I'm like, Dad, Devin never got in trouble for that. And so as you can see, I'm still a little bit bitter about this whole thing. But seriously, as I was reflecting back on this story, I realized that even from childhood, there has been this thing. There's been this thing in me that wants people to get paid back for what they do. That wants people to get paid back for what they do. You do something to hurt me, you gotta pay for that. How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? How many of y'all have ever felt that before? See, by definition, we call this revenge. We call this revenge. It's just simply the desire for vengeance or retribution. It's the desire for payback. It's that desire to pay back. And I know that I'm not the only one in here who has ever felt that, because I know I'm not the only one in here who's ever been hurt. See, when someone hurts us, betrays us, uses us, abuses us, neglects us, abandons us, it's natural for us to want that person or those people to feel, to some level, the pain that they caused us to feel. We all know that. We know that feeling. To want someone else to feel the pain that they caused us to feel. And it's usually not because we just want to see them hurt. It's not usually just because we want to see them hurt, but it's more about us wanting them to know how they made us feel. You need to know what you did to me. You need to know the pain you caused me. You need to know how you made me feel. And there's probably someone who's coming to your mind more immediately than anybody else right now because of how deeply that person has hurt. See, when we're hurt, we're usually tempted to go one of two ways. See, some of us are tempted to act as passive doormats and to allow ourselves to continually get stepped on. And others of us are tempted to strike back and escalate the cycle of violence. And even if we never act outwardly on this desire for revenge, even if we never act on this externally, at the very least, we internally hold what they've done to us against them. We hold that thing against them. Meaning that whenever we think of that person, whenever we see that person, whenever we speak about that person or hear that person spoken about, we're always relating to them through the filter or through the grid of what they've done to us, right? But see, if you spend any amount of time around Jesus, you realize pretty quickly that Jesus doesn't give us much room to play the revenge game. In fact, he doesn't give us any room at all. He doesn't give us any room at all. See, this whole series, we're talking about what it means to take up the cross and follow Jesus. And last week, like I said earlier, I invited us to think about taking up this cross as living out this vocation of self-giving love for the sake of the world. And there is probably no clearer cut way that we are called to bear the cross than through refusing to play the payback game. And instead of demanding payback, taking up the mantle of forgiveness. Now we're going to talk about forgiveness, what it is and what it isn't, so that we can have a clear understanding of what it is that Jesus is calling us to and how he's calling us to step into this. But before we get into all of that, I just want to acknowledge that when I mention the word forgiveness, some of us are having some very deep and visceral reactions to that because of how deep the hurt is. Because of how real the pain is. The hurt that we've experienced at the hands of somebody else is real, and it's deep, and it's been traumatic. This is one of the reasons why I so appreciate Peter in this text of Matthew chapter 18, because I feel like Peter is all of us in this text. I feel Peter on a deep level. When Jesus starts to talk about forgiveness, and Peter's response is, Lord, how many times? I mean, I hear you talking about forgiveness, but really, how far does this thing have to go? And keep in mind that when Peter asks this question, he's got a repeat offender in mind. He's got a repeat offender in mind, someone who has hurt you more than once. He's not talking about the person who does something to you, realizes what they've done, apologizes, changes course, and doesn't do that thing again. No, he's talking about that person that you've got to keep having that same conversation with. He's talking about that person whose apologies seem to mean very little because they keep doing the same thing over and over. He's talking about that person who barely even recognizes that they've hurt you. And the only apology that they can seem to muster up and offer is, well, if I hurt you, I'm sorry. If I hurt you, if I caused you pain, I'm sorry. See, we all reach our limit with that type of stuff, right? We all have our limit with those type of things. And so, this is why the rabbis would typically teach that offering forgiveness 3 times is enough. 3 strikes, you're out. And after that 3rd time, you have the right to dust off your hands. You have the right to cut them off and to cancel them. See, cancel culture is nothing new. This thing is old. You have the right to cut them off and cancel them. And so Peter, trying to prove himself once again, like we talked last week, and be that super disciple that he's always trying to be. He says, all right, Jesus, I know that the rabbis say 3 times, but what if I go 7 times? How about if I take this to the 7 limit? That's enough, right? I mean, that's more than half the suggested amount. What Jesus says next, none of us really have any sort of category. And so he says to Peter, not 7 times, 77 times. Not 7 times, Peter, 77. See, when I hear that, it's like, I'm like, all right, Jesus, 77 times, all right. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my little post-it, put it right on my wall, take my little pen. Oh, you said that? You offended me? All right, here. One. All right. I post it, put it back up, put it right there. Because it's there. Got it in my hand right here. Post it. 1. Okay. You said that to me this time? Oh, that, you know what? That counts as 2 strikes. Boom, boom. And we just keep that thing. See, here's the thing. You might not actually do that. You might not actually have that posted up on your wall where you're just marking off the tallies of how many times people have offended you. But here's the thing. All of us have that thing internally. We all have our internal post-it note of how many times people have offended us and what our limit is. And see, when they reach that limit, when they get to that point, that's when we take up our right to cut them off. That's when we take up our right to blow up on them. That's when we take up our right to never speak to them again. That's when we take up our right to demand that they pay us back for what they've done. Some of y'all are like, my limit is like 1, maybe 2. I mean, 77 is a little bit overkill. I'm not going that far. But see, when Jesus says this, he doesn't have a list of tally marks in mind. He's got something in mind that goes far beyond that. But to understand what he's really trying to get at, there's something that I want you to see that's not really apparent in the text of Matthew 18 upon first reading. It would have been apparent to Peter and to any Jewish listener, but this is usually something that we miss. And so when Jesus says 77 times, he's making an allusion to a story in Genesis chapter 4 about a man named Lamech. We don't know much about Lamech except that he's one of the descendants of Cain. Cain was the son of Adam and Eve who committed the first murder against his brother Abel. And so as one of Cain's descendants, we know that Lamech was hurt by somebody. We don't know who. Lamech was wounded by somebody. We don't know the extent of his pain or his woundedness, but he did write a song about how he responded to what happened to him. And this is what he said. He said, I killed a man for wounding me, a boy for striking. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's revenge is 77-fold. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's revenge is 77-fold. Now, one thing you got to understand is that the way that the first 11 chapters of Genesis function in the Bible is that everything in them is attempting to help us understand something about the human story, the human condition, and the human predicament. And so with Lamech's story, the point being made is that the impulse toward revenge and the impulse toward payback is hardwired into our humanity. That this impulse toward revenge goes back far. That it's just a part of this human DNA that we carry. And not just an impulse toward revenge, but an impulse toward escalating this thing. If Cain's revenge is 7, I'm taking it to the next level and making it 77. I will avenge myself 77 times. See, even if I can't make the person who hurt me pay me back, the whole idea is that someone is going to pay. Someone's going to pay. This is the cycle that we all participate in. We make others pay for the hurt that we experience. Whether it's the person who hurt us in the first place, or it's someone entirely different. Someone else entirely. Someone pays that debt. We may not even realize that we're doing this. We may not even realizing that we're making others pay, but we do make others pay the debt. And so some of the acute ways that this shows up is, right? It shows up in parenting relationships all the time. So I was wounded when I was a kid. I may not be able to make my father or my mother pay the debt for that, but guess who's paying the debt? My kids. Because they're getting, the cycle's coming out and it's affecting them. Somebody pays the debt. It comes out in relationships with spouses and partners all the time. I was wounded in some prior relationship. And so I may not be able to make that person pay, but somebody's got to pay. So it comes out. But what Jesus is saying when he brings up this whole idea of 77 is he wants us to know that what he is coming to do is actually to rewrite the human story. See, when he calls us into this vocation of discipleship and into the school where he's teaching us how to be a different sort of human being, he's calling us to be people who refuse to perpetuate Lamech's cycle of revenge and instead become those in whom the cycle is broken. Turn to the person next to you and tell them, be a cycle breaker. Yeah, tell them, be a cycle breaker. See, something has to break the cycle of revenge and payback in order to make a different kind of future possible. A different future in our world, in our churches, in our relationships, in our families, in our workplaces. A future where violence doesn't beget more violence. A future where hurt doesn't beget more hurt. A future where woundedness doesn't lead to more woundedness. This is why one of the archbishops in South Africa, Desmond Tutu, was one of the leaders in the anti-apartheid movement. This is why he always used to say that there is no future without forgiveness. He even wrote a book that was titled No Future Without Forgiveness. And the whole idea is that if the cycle of vengeance just continues on and on and on and on, we will eventually destroy ourselves from the inside out. And Jesus is calling that something that breaks the cycle to be us. Those who follow him on the way to Jerusalem and take up the vocation of cross-bearing. I love what Pastor Brian Zahn says about this when he says, by the blood of Jesus, we have been redeemed from sin. The sinful way that Cain and his successors organized human civilization. This act of cruciform love is the epicenter of Christianity. The cross gives the world a new organizing principle. Instead of being organized around an axis of power enforced by violence, the world has now been refounded around an axis of love expressed in forgiveness. And this is what we mean when we speak of the salvation of the cross. That the world has a brand new organizing principle. That is no longer organized around a cycle of revenge and the cycle of payback and the cycle of violence, but is reordered around this cycle, this giving out of love instead that is expressed in forgiveness. Now understand that what Jesus is doing here is completely unprecedented. This is not what we as human beings do. This is why the prominent 20th century philosopher and political theorist Hannah Arendt, she made the claim that the discoverer of the role of forgiveness in the realm of human affairs was Jesus of Nazareth. No, Jesus wasn't the first person to ever talk about forgiveness, but her argument is that Jesus was the first person to take forgiveness and actually call people to employ it as a strategy to break the cycle of vengeance. that those who take up the call to forgive become those who are in their own bodies breaking the cycle, refusing to have that thing perpetuate. This is something brand new that Jesus inaugurated and embodied in his crucifixion. And he calls you and I to come and die with him so that we can be those who also make a brand new future possible. Now, before we look at this story that Jesus tells to help deepen our understanding around forgiveness, I do want to say just a few words about forgiveness. I want to say a few words about forgiveness because there's a lot of confusion and murkiness around what we mean when we say forgiveness. Just let that go. Forgive that. And so most of what I'm about to share in this part, I'm borrowing from my friend Rich Velotis, who's a pastor at New Life Fellowship in Queens. And he reminds us that forgiveness, one, does not mean forgetting what someone has done. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting what someone has done. If I forgive somebody, it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily, I can't, sometimes the pain is so deep that we don't just forget. The scars are real. The wounds are real. And so there's a difference between forgiving and forgetting. And forgiveness does not necessarily mean forgetting. It reminds us that forgiveness does not mean that there are no consequences to what someone has done. Forgiveness does not mean that we will no longer feel the pain of what happened to us. So if I forgive, I'm just going to move on and now I don't feel the pain of that. No, that doesn't happen. Forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation or trusting that person again. It may open the door to that. It may open the door to reconciliation, but forgiveness does not equal reconciliation. And it's important to say that because sometimes it's just the case that if I can forgive somebody, but I may never be able to trust them again. So I may be able to forgive you, but I may never be able to get to the point where I can be alone in the same room with you again. That level of trust, I don't know that I can have that. I may be able to forgive you, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust my kids to be alone with me. So forgiveness is possible, but that doesn't equal trust and reconciliation back to what things used to be. So forgiveness does not necessarily mean that things will be as they once were. Forgiveness does not mean excusing what someone else has done. It doesn't mean excusing or passing over what someone else has done. Actually, to the contrary, true forgiveness actually requires a recognition of the hurt. It requires a recognition of the offense. We'll talk about that in a second, but even in our relationship with God, right? When we come and what does John say in the book of 1 John? He says, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. But that word confess our sins, it means there needs to be an acknowledgement of the offense. There needs to be an acknowledgement of the hurt and the wrong. But with all that forgiveness does not mean, let me offer you my definition of what I believe forgiveness does mean. Forgiveness, it means that I will no longer require someone to pay back the debt that they owe me before I'll treat them as a human being. It means that I recognize that that person is not the sum of their sin against me. It means that they are still a human being created in the image of God, and I will not treat them solely on the basis of how they hurt me. I will not treat them solely according to that basis. I'm not going to hang their sin that they've done against me, the way that they've hurt me, I'm not going to hang that over their head for the rest of my life. See, I told you this forgiveness stuff is heavy. If we really get into it, if we really understand this, what Jesus is calling us to. That's why it's a part of this way of the cross. Let me say one more thing before we move quickly into this story. Self-forgiveness usually takes time. Forgiveness is both an event, it's a moment, it's an act of the will, but it's also a process. It's a journey. There's a book called Don't Forgive Too Soon that was written years ago, but I believe it's still very helpful, that outlines 5 stages of healthy forgiveness. And the authors, they write this, they say that the first stage that we go through as we engage in healthy forgiveness is the stage of denial. And in this stage, we know that something bad and something hurtful and something wrong has happened to us. We don't admit that it hurts. And so we just go on with everyday life. And then that next stage is anger. Anger sets in, and we clearly begin to recognize that we are upset, and we begin to rehearse to ourselves over and over again what that other person did. The next stage out of anger is we move into bargaining. And in this stage of bargaining, we say, forgiveness could be possible, but I will only forgive if. And we start to set the conditions for how we'll forgive. I will forgive you if. I'll forgive if this happens, if this is said, if this is done. And we begin the bargaining process. The fourth stage is, they call the stage of depression. And they say in this stage, we begin to give up waiting for the other person to change. We lose hope. And we can even begin to blame ourselves for what happened. And this last stage they call acceptance. And in this stage, we accept or come to terms with what happened. We recognize that it was in the past. We realize that acceptance doesn't mean that everything in life is healed, but it does free us from the tyranny of that event. It frees us from the tyranny of what happened to us, and it makes it possible for us to begin to move forward. And so as we move back to the text, and Jesus proceeds to teach us about this new way of being human in the kingdom of God by telling us a story, which is typically what Jesus likes to do. Jesus likes to tell us stories. He likes to give us a new narrative to live into. For so long, we believe this old narrative of the cycle of revenge, repaying 77-fold. Jesus is like, no, let me give you a new story, a new narrative to grab hold of. And so he starts to tell the story to his disciples, and he says, so one day was a king who was going to collect and settle the debts that were owed him. And so one day, a servant who owed this king an astronomical amount. So the amount that Jesus gives them, it's basically, he's basically saying, if he was in modern day vernacular, he was saying, this servant comes to the king and he owes the king $1 zillion. That's basically what Jesus is saying, because the amount that he actually names there is like 20 years worth of wages, is what this person owes to the king. And so he says to the servant, he's like, okay, you owe me this much. I'm going to sell off your wife and your family, and I'm going to throw you in jail to pay off this bill. Which in those days, the king was legally, he was able to do that, to pay the debt. And so the servant, recognizing what's happening, he falls to his knees and he starts pleading with the king. And he says, please, sir, please, master, just give me some time. Just give me some time. I promise you, I will pay back everything that I owe you. Now we know that the servant cannot pay back what he owed the king. There's no way. The debt is too great. It's far too great. He can't pay it back. And so the king looks at this servant who's down on his knees and pleading. He looks at him and he says, all right, forget about the debt. Let's move on. Go back with your family. Your debt's forgiven. You don't have to pay the $1 zillion. Go home. You forgive it. Your debt is forgiven. So that servant, you can imagine, he is thrilled at this point. I mean, imagine that you just got a letter in the mail that said, hey, all your student loan debt's forgiven. Yeah. You don't have to worry about paying anymore. You don't have to worry about the interest accruing anymore. Go home. I know I'd be like, yeah. Walking home, happy, like, I don't have to pay this back anymore. And so the servant's happy, and then he sees someone on the street who owes him a couple bucks. And so the amount that it says he saw someone, another servant, a fellow worker, who owed him 10 denarii. So that's about, I don't know, $5. And so he sees this guy, I don't know where the $5 came from. He probably borrowed it from him one day for, I don't know, he wanted a coffee, he wanted something, and he's like, all right, I got you, right? Sees this guy on the street, he said, you owe me $5. And this guy's like, I know, I'm sorry. I don't have any cash on me. I promise I'll pay you back. He's like, no. It's been too long. It's been too long. I want my $5 back. And so instead of having mercy on this guy who owes him $5, he takes him and he throws him in prison. And so other people see what happens. And they're like, hold on. So you mean to tell me that you were just forgiven this astronomical debt, yet you can't have mercy on this person who owes you $5? And so they tell the king what happened. The king calls this one servant back in, and he says, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? He says, do you realize how much I've forgiven you? Do you realize how much the debt that you owed was, and you couldn't have mercy on your fellow person? And so he says, you know what? Scratch that. You're going to prison yourself. And so as the text says, Jesus says, he gave him over to the jailers. He was handed over to the jailers until he could pay back everything that he owed. Now, there's a lot of things that I can say about the story, but I just want to highlight two things for you before we close up. And I want to quickly point out from this story about how we can follow Jesus in this way of cross-bearing and the vocation of forgiveness by looking at these two things. And the first thing is this, is that in order to follow Jesus on the way of forgiveness, and may I remind you that there is no other way to go. Right? This is the only way. If we're going to follow Jesus on the path of discipleship, there's no other way to go. And so if we're going to follow Jesus on this way, we must recognize how much we've been forgiven. We must first recognize how much we've been forgiven. See, the whole point of the story that Jesus is trying to communicate with his disciples is he's like, listen, I understand that you've been offended by people and hurt by people. And I'm not making light of that. I know your hurt is real. But I also want you to understand how great the hurt is that you have contributed to the God of creation. I want you to recognize the debt that you owe to the God of heaven. I want you to recognize that God created you as a human being and gave you this vocation of ruling with God in this good creation. That you were given this vocation of working alongside of God to ensure that the good creation remained very good. That the relationships remained very strong. But you took it upon yourself and said, God, we don't need you for this. And so we are going to put ourselves on the throne and kick you off of the throne, God. And so we know how to run your world better than you do. And what happened? Things started to fall apart. And Jesus is like, you need to understand, that's not on God, that's on you. When you look around and you see this world, the brokenness of this world, and you see it falling apart, and you see injustice, and you see murder, and you see hatred, and you see it all, that's not on God, that's on you. That's what we have done. That is is just piling high and higher and higher and higher as we go forward. Oh, you were given charge to steward God's creation? Well, look what's happening now as climate change is just wreaking havoc, as things are just pressing, and you're not even thinking about generations that are coming in the future. That's not on God, that's on you. Because you haven't taken up your vocation. The debt is just climbing higher and higher and higher. Oh, how about when you sinned against that person and you didn't treat them as a human being created in my image, and you stepped on top of them, and you denied them their rights, and you didn't even recognize that they are a human being created in my image. The debt is just climbing higher, higher, higher. But in spite of the ever-increasing debt, God's response to that is not, I'm going to throw you in jail forever. Never. God's response is, I will come and take care of the debt that you owe. I will come and take care of what you owe. And so God put on flesh in the person of Jesus and took in his own body the suffering and the pain that has been caused by our hands. Took it in his own body, filled up the debt, and paid it in full. We just sung about that. Now my debt is paid, it's been paid in full. So when Jesus hangs on that cross and he offers forgiveness, it's not a forgiveness that says you have to do a little bit more to get full forgiveness. It says, no, you are forgiven in full. Your debt has been paid. Go home. You don't have to pay anymore. And so in order for us to actually live in the way of forgiveness, we need to walk with a continued recognition of how much we've actually been forgiven. That's why Jesus says in Luke 7:47, he says, the one who has been forgiven much loves much. The one who recognizes how much they've been forgiven, they love much, but the one who has been forgiven little loves little. The one who has little recognition of the forgiveness that is there. It doesn't even move us toward love. We continue to live in the cycle of vengeance, the cycle of payback. And so Jesus says you need to recognize how much you've been forgiven. The second thing that I want to point out is that in order to walk in this cruciform way of forgiveness, we must recognize that to refuse to forgive is to also refuse our own freedom. To refuse to forgive is to refuse our own freedom. See, it's been said before that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That other person that hurt me is probably not even thinking about what they did to me. But I'm over here every day with what they did on loop. I'm thinking about it, and I'm replaying it, and the anger is increasing, and I'm rehearsing in my head what I'll say to them if I get the chance. And it's just on loop. And as much as I want them to get theirs, I end up keeping myself in bondage to what they've done to me. So I'm the one that ends up paying more and more, even though I want them to pay. Because I've got this thing on loop all the time, over and over. This is why Jesus says that unforgiveness is like being handed over to the jailers and torturers. It's like being in prison. And the only way out is to unlock that prison from the inside. You've got the key. You've got the key. That prison is locked from the inside, and the only way out is for you to put the key of forgiveness in that door. Because see, when we hold on to unforgiveness, there is a perceived sense of power that we have. We think we have this power. We think that we have the power in this relational dynamic now. We think that I'm claiming my right and my power to withhold forgiveness and to require you to pay the debt that you owe. But in actuality, the more that I hold on to unforgiveness, the more power I am giving away to that other person constantly. Because what they've done to me, what they said to me, how they neglected me is continuing to rule my life. It's continuing to rule my life every single day. Some of y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. Because it's been 20, 30, 40 years. And that thing is still dying. But Jesus wants to set some people free tonight. Jesus wants you to get free. You need to hear that. Jesus wants you to get free. And Jesus not only calls you on the way of forgiveness so that you can come and change the world with him and be a part of breaking this cycle and making a new future possible, but he calls you to forgiveness so that your life can be changed as well. So that you can be set free as well. This offer of forgiveness, yes, it is for the world to be changed, and it is for you to be changed. It is for you to come out of that prison that you've been in for a long time. So that you can be set free, and so that you can reclaim your humanity and your dignity. What that person has done. The worship team comes forward. Let me just say this. To take up the cross of forgiveness, it's like that. It's like that. Engaging in the act and in the process of forgiveness is crucifixion. Because when we forgive, we are choosing, just like Jesus did when he was hanging on Calvary's Hill, we are choosing to absorb the evil of what someone has done to me instead of giving it back in return. So just like Jesus when he was hanging on that cross and he was absorbing the hatred and the insults and the nails being driven into his hand and the thorns being pressed down on his head, Jesus absorbed it and did not give it back. When he could have cursed his enemies from the cross. When he could have cursed those who hurt him from the cross. When he had the power in his hands to call legions of angels to come and drop fire on their heads. He said no, because something has to break that cycle. That always happens. That's how it always ends up. Those who are hurt and abused and betrayed and neglected, we just pour that back out. We pour it back out. In that story that Jesus told, that servant that was forgiven, and then he went out and he had some issues with that other guy. The text says that when he saw that other person, he choked him. He choked him and he said, "Pay me what you know." Because that's what unforgiveness does. It causes us to, instead of moving towards someone else in love, it causes us to move toward them in order to choke them up. Pay me what you know. But Jesus said something has to break the cycle. In order for the cycle to be broken, the hurt, the pain, and the evil has to be absorbed instead of returned. It has to. And this will not happen by just trying harder to forgive and mustering up the strength to forgive. This will only happen by the power of the Spirit of God. And so for some of you, as we respond to this call to the way of forgiveness tonight, for some of you, your prayer, it just needs to be, Jesus, would would you do something in me to make me even want to forgive that person? Because right now I have zero desire. I don't even want to. There's nothing in me that makes me want to offer forgiveness. There's nothing in me that makes me want to refuse to hold on to my right to bitterness. And here's the thing. For those of us who have been deeply hurt, you can listen to all the voices in the world and they'll tell you it's your right to be bitter. That's what the message, it is your right to be bitter. It is your right to be angry. It is your right to not forgive. That's your right. But Jesus says when you come and you follow me, you drop your rights. You drop your right to unforgiveness. You drop your right to hold on to bitterness. You drop your right to self-preservation. You drop it and you take up your cross. And you come and you follow me on this way. And if you want to come with me, there is no other way to go. There's no other way. And so some of you just need to spend time with Jesus and say, would you do something in me to help me even want to forgive? Some of you are recognizing tonight that you've never experienced the great forgiveness of God in your own life. So we talked about this great debt that has been forgiven. You recognize, wow, I've never even sat under that and allowed that word of forgiveness to wash over me. I've never received it. You've never received the good news that you are forgiven by God, that God forgives you, that God does not hold your sin or your iniquity against you. That that's been paid. And so for you tonight, the invitation is, would you come and receive the forgiveness of God? And let it wash over you. For some of you, you know exactly who it is you need to forgive. That person's been on your mind this whole time. You know exactly who it is. And you want to do it. You want to get free, but you just need the power of God to be able to do it. Because you can't. You know you can't do it. And so you need power from on high to be able to move you in this direction of forgiveness to that person. And lastly, you know what? Listen, sometimes the hardest person to forgive is not another person, but it's yourself. Sometimes the hardest person to learn to forgive is the person that's sitting right there in that seat issue. You recognize that God's forgiven you, but you can't seem to forgive yourself. You can't forgive yourself for what you've done. You can't forgive yourself for the ways that you failed. You can't forgive yourself for the ways that you've hurt somebody else. You can't forgive yourself, and so you will continue to live in this cycle of beating yourself up. You can't forgive yourself for the ways that you have wasted time and squandered years, and you can't forgive yourself. And so you end up living in the cycle, and the cycle comes back to you. You're just beating yourself up. And so tonight, God is inviting you to come embrace the freedom, to embrace the freedom of learning to forgive yourself. So as we move into this time of response, the worship team is going to lead us in a song, and those responses are going to be up there on the screen. I want to invite those who are praying to come forward. Our prayer team is here and available for you if you just want to receive prayer. Maybe you're one of those people that these responses is landing with you in some way. Maybe you need to come and receive just a prayer that God would enable you to forgive. Or that God would give you the desire to want to forgive. Maybe you need to come and you need to ask, can you tell me more about this forgiveness that God offers me? Or maybe you just need to receive prayer and say, I beat myself up every single day and I don't even know how to forgive myself. I lock myself in this own prison. maybe you need to come and receive prayer. So during this time, as we're singing this song, I want to invite you to come, invite you to not hesitate, to come, to receive prayer, to talk to somebody, and we love to begin walking with you in this journey of forgiveness. We love walking with you in this journey of forgiveness together. So let's sing this song together. Engage with the God who has forgiven you and who loves you. And let's respond to this word that we